The Financial Survival Network, helping you survive and thrive in the new economy. Go to CarrieLutz.com and sign up for 30 free micro trainings on financial survival.
1490 WGCH, this is Kerry Lutz. You're listening to the Financial Survival Network. It's time for another Triple Lutz report. Guy by the name of Robert Samuelson started out working mostly for mainstream publications, Newsweek, The Washington Post. He was at the business desk, and he wrote a book in 2008 that basically said that inflation, hyperinflation, was going to kill the United States. He's got an article out right now in Real Clear Markets, and it's entitled "A Country in Denial About Its Fiscal Future." And just to quote a little bit from it, there are moments when our political system, whose essential job is to mediate conflicts in broadly acceptable and desirable ways, is simply not up to the task. It fails. This may be one of those moments. What we learned in 2011 is that the frustrating and confusing budget debate may never reach a workable conclusion. It may continue indefinitely until it's abruptly ended by a severe economic or financial crisis that wrenches control from the elected leaders. Now, look, it's arguable whether our elected leaders have any control any longer. Bob Chapman says it. Darrell Schoen says it. Wall Street owns the government. Wall Street runs the show. And I don't think there's much argument about that after what we've seen, the nonstop stream of bailouts, corporativism, crony capitalism. There's no question about it. But one thing is for certain, if you don't know what your political system's supposed to do, then it's going to be really difficult to ever figure out how to solve any problems. And according to our founders and the concepts of limited government, he's got this thing all wrong, that the government is somehow the referee that's trying to work out problems among the people. Yes, that is a function, to provide a court system where the inhabitants of the country can peaceably work out their differences in a court of law. And we could get into the legal system another time. That's good for about 20 Triple Lutz reports. But what are the other functions? To protect us from external enemies and internal enemies. All right? That's two functions. To protect and preserve the integrity of the free market, another one. And basically to give us an identity, even though that's not really in the Constitution, of shared values. That's one that I added. Now, obviously, protecting the free market, we failed at a long time ago. We could go back to World War I, back to the Civil War, doesn't matter. But what he's saying here is we're shifting from giveaway politics to takeaway politics. And that is the concept that in 1960, 26% of expenditures were directed towards individuals, transfer payments, as economists like to call welfare. And now we're looking at 66%. And during this time, he says, federal income tax receipts have remained relatively constant as a percentage of income, going from 17.8% in 60 to 18.5% now. What he's failing to realize is there's a zillion other federal taxes that have been added and increased since 1960. There's taxes on Social Security, there's Medicare taxes, they've way jacked up the tax on cigarettes, they've jacked up the tax on alcohol and motor fuels, gasoline, so electricity, there's stealth taxes you don't even know about that just get passed along to you. Whatever he's talking about, I don't know, but the tax burden has gone way up. It's just been shifted away from income tax to other less visible, less noticeable taxes. Disability taxes, I mean, forget it. Your Social Security tax has quadrupled since then. The list goes on and on. His whole notion of what the government's supposed to do really determines his outlook here. And he's saying that, you know, when we've had failures in the past, we had the Civil War, we had the 60s with race riots, we had out of control inflation in the 70s. He's trying to play this middle road that basically liberals imply wrongly that taxing the rich will solve the long-term budget problem. It won't. For example, the Forbes 400 richest Americans have a collective wealth of $1.5 trillion if the government simply confiscated everything they own. and turn them into paupers, it would barely cover the one-time 2011 deficit of 1.3 trillion. It's actually higher than that, but no, they lie about it. What a shock. Government not telling the truth. Who would have ever thunk it? He says conservatives deplore spending in the abstract, ignoring the popularity of much spending, especially Social Security and Medicare. What about libertarians who don't believe the government should be doing any of this stuff? Well, their views, he's trying to steal the middle course between liberal and conservatism and be the voice of reason. But we do agree on one thing. The political system's failing. It's stuck in the past. All these programs are 50 years old. They've failed miserably, and yet we keep urinating more and more money away on them. The college bubble that we talked about before. There is more student loan debt than there is credit card debt in the country, and you can't get rid of student loan debt. It's with you for life. No statute of limitations, non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. He doesn't talk about the fact that 2/3 of our money, and that's the military and the other budget, the civil budget, gets wasted. It's totally wasted. And not to mention all those parasites that work for the government, people that don't do anything other than make everyone's lives miserable. They don't protect us. They don't work in the courts. I mean, this system is bloated, it is corrupt, and it's going to collapse, and there is no political system in the world that can save it. Even if the founding fathers were to be reincarnated today, and Jefferson, Obama said, Thomas Jefferson's back, let him take over. And we had Washington as the Secretary of Defense, and Alexander Hamilton, he was running the Federal Reserve. They wouldn't be able to do anything here. They wouldn't be able to solve the problem. The only way to address it is lesser, limited government. All right, I said it before, I'll say it again. Gerald Ford said it best. The government that is big enough to give you everything that you want is powerful enough to take away everything that you have. The 800-pound gorilla in the room is the government has entered so many non-governmental functions that it can't do anything right. I remember Milton Friedman showing a number of years ago, this must have been 30 years ago, when he did Free to Choose, a great series. I highly recommend it. It's on YouTube. Go check it out. But in one building in Washington, you have the Department of Agriculture, and they're helping tobacco farmers grow better crops, have less bugs and better production. And they used to even subsidize tobacco. Now the subsidies are less clear, but I'm sure they're still there in different ways. And then in another building down the road, there's a group of bureaucrats trying to figure out in the Health Institute how to stop you from smoking because it's going to kill you. And then in another building in the Department of Treasury, they're saying, don't you dare stop smoking because we need that money. If you stop smoking now, the government will go bankrupt because we get a couple of bucks a pack or $1 a pack, whatever it is, on every pack of cigarettes that gets sold in the country. So when you have government, going at cross purposes, coming out on both sides of an issue, what can you possibly expect other than the mess that we have now? I mean, there are thousands and thousands of departments that nobody has a clue what they do. And they employ millions of people who get paid a fortune, bloated salaries, especially in light of the work that they do. And what do? They attack the private sector. They make life horrible for small business people. For big companies, they can have high-rises, skyscrapers full of attorneys complying with everything. And they love big government. Big business loves big government because the more rules that government imposes, the harder it becomes for smaller companies to compete. That's the fact of the matter. Every major regulatory scheme that has been passed in this country over the past 100 years has been embraced and supported by big government. It goes back to the Interstate Commerce Commission, regulating railroads to put out free market competition. It goes on right to this day to the Food and Drug Administration. Drug companies love the FDA because you know what? It cost over $1 billion to get a new drug approved. So what do? If you're a small company and you got a potential cure to some disease, you have to team up with big pharma. Eventually, Big Pharma says, gee, that thing really works good. We're buying you out. And you really don't have a choice. You have to sell to them. And this is why innovation's slowing down. This is why the country, the economy is contracting, because the government is a big vampire squid, and it's killing the host. It doesn't care whether it kills the host or not, because it figures that, hey, after the host dies, it'll just be them, and they'll run things the way they want. And that's what's going on in the world. Samuelson, wake up. The problem isn't that we don't tax enough or that we have promised too much. The problem is the government has grown like a malignant tumor, and until it's cut out and put back in its proper state, hopefully in a very small petri dish, the country has no hope and the economy has no hope. And the same goes for the world, because every other government has emulated us. They're all expanding their power. They're all attempting to do things that they were never intended to do. And the net result, 100% of the time, is failure. Socialism, communism, collectivism always winds up failing, period. It's been another Triple Lutz Report. This is Kerry Lutz signing off. If you want to send me an email, go to kl@kerrylutz.com. That's kl@kerrylutz.com.